My name is Olivia Monroe. I'm 36, and last week, they seated me next to the recycling bin. Not at the family table, not near the dance floor, not even within earshot of the toast I helped finance. While guests laughed inside the grand ballroom, sipping champagne under chandeliers I paid for, I sat on a folding chair in the kitchen. The scent of roasted duck and garlic mashed potatoes drifted past me like a final reminder. I could fund their dreams, but I was never part of them. They said I didn't like the spotlight, that I was too private for public seating. But the truth? They were never afraid of my silence. They were afraid of what would happen if I ever decided to break it. And that night, I did. Before I tell you how I turned their $1 million wedding into a $30 million corporate fallout, take a second to hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Because this isn't just about family. It's about what happens when the person they erased owns the company holding their safety net. The scent of roasted duck and garlic mashed potatoes seeped from the swinging double doors that led into the grand ballroom, taunting me with the luxury I'd financed but couldn't access. Behind me, the industrial-sized ice machine coughed to life, drowning out the polite laughter coming from the guests I couldn't see. Mom always said, "Let the boys shine. You'll have your moment someday." I was 36. I'd built and sold 2 tech companies before I was 30. I was now CEO of one of the fastest-growing AI firms on the East Coast. If not now, then when? I smoothed the fabric of my black silk dress, custom-tailored in Milan and understated by design. No cleavage, no sparkle, no screaming for attention. Just elegance. But apparently, even elegance wasn't enough for a seat at the family table. I watched as a server tiptoed past me, offering a quick, apologetic smile, then continued stacking plates on a stainless steel counter behind me. A few feet away, my assigned table stood bare except for a folded white card that read, "Reserved for staff overflow." I hadn't come for attention. I came because I believed that despite everything, despite my family pretending I didn't exist for years, showing up meant something. Support meant something. But it seemed my RSVP had been interpreted as a mild inconvenience rather than a gesture of peace. The swinging doors opened again, letting out another wave of perfume and music. A young waitress slipped through and paused when she saw me. "You're Olivia Monroe, right?" she asked, eyes widening. Sorry, I just recognized you from Tech Week." I gave a small nod. "Hi. I thought you'd be in the ballroom?" "So did I said dryly. Her cheeks flushed. "They told us the main seating was for VIPs and family only." She hesitated. "But you're not on the list." I finished for her. She winced. "Do you want me to get someone?" "No," I said softly. "They've already said enough." Just then, Madison stepped in. "Olivia," she cooed, hands outstretched as if I were a toddler who'd wandered off. "We were wondering where you'd gone." I smiled tightly, just enjoying the ambiance. Madison's dress sparkled like a champagne bottle about to explode. Her makeup was flawless, her smile manufactured. She looked around the cluttered kitchen like it might stain her skin. "We didn't know if you'd want to be photographed," she said lightly, with a delicate shrug. "You always said you hated these things." I raised a brow. "Things like family weddings?" Madison's expression didn't waver. "No, I mean, press, cameras, publicity. You're so private. We didn't want to assume." There it was. Sugar-coated venom. I offered no reply. She gave a little wave, then vanished back into the ballroom, where her real family awaited. The doors didn't swing again for a long time. I sat still, trying to convince myself not to care. But I did care. I always had. Every slight, every overlooked moment, every word of praise Ryan received that echoed a contribution I'd made. It all came back now, like splinters working their way to the surface. I heard the familiar clinking of a glass against silverware. The crowd inside hushed. Ryan was giving a toast. "To my beautiful wife," he began, his voice amplified by the mic, "and to the family that raised me, supported me, and helped me become the man I am today." My breath caught. No mention of the seed money I wired him at 24. No mention of the years I introduced him to clients he now built his firm upon. Not even a nod. "And to Madison," he continued, "who helped me find my voice and my vision." I reached into my clutch with frozen fingers and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the congratulatory LinkedIn post I'd scheduled 3 days ago, proud of my brother Ryan on his wedding day, wishing him and Madison a future full of joy. A press-friendly shot of us from 3 years back, attached beneath it. I tapped delete. The post vanished. Then I opened a new draft. 2. Lena Carlisle. Subject, green wedding contract. "Pull it," I typed. Indefinitely. I knew she'd get it. Lena always got it. I stood, taking in the room one more time, the clatter of pans, the sterile white walls, the too bright lighting that bleached everything of warmth. I had funded this reception, the caterers, the musicians, the decor, the estate rental itself. But I wasn't worth a linen-covered chair in the same room. So be it. I wasn't angry. Anger fades. This was clarity. I deleted one more thing, the memo scheduled for our quarterly partnership update that included Green Enterprises integration. Then I started drafting a new memo, a cold one. Legal in tone, sharp in intent, the kind of memo that sends boardrooms scrambling. I was done asking for a seat at their table. They just reminded me. I built my own. I once signed that deal to protect the family name. Now it will burn the bridge they walked on. The apartment was still, the kind of stillness that hums louder than noise. Outside, the city roared in neon and steel, but here, just past midnight, everything was motionless, suspended in the hush of restraint. The stem of a wineglass sat pressed between my fingers, untouched, condensation sliding slowly down its side. My laptop glowed on the marble counter like an accusation. Nexus Tech Green Corp Strategic Partnership Agreement. Value, $30 million. Scope, AI-integrated cloud migration. Rollout, 2 weeks from today. The words blurred after a while, not because they didn't matter, but because I knew them by heart. I'd orchestrated every clause, negotiated every milestone, not because I trusted Madison's father, but because Ryan begged. Again. I leaned back, and the past cracked open like a bad joint. It was 2020. Ryan's expansion into smart logistics had tanked so hard that media outlets were circling like vultures. I still remember the panic in his voice. "They'll eat me alive, Liv. I just need some air cover. 1/4. Just help me look stable. Please." I could have said no, but I didn't. I moved a $4.7 million contract from Nexus Tech to his startup as a shell cover. I made some phone calls, told a few reporters the supply chain kink was temporary, and when he was asked who turned things around, he smiled on air and said, "It was all Madison." I never corrected him. Now, 3 years later, I stared at the contract I'd once considered a family favor. Back then, it was a bandage. Now, it was kindling. A soft chime. A Slack notification. "Lena, you sure about pulling green?" I'm not asking as your assistant. I'm asking as someone who remembers your face when they seated you by the recycling bin. I cracked a small smile. It's not personal, Lena. It's business. But it was personal. Of course it was. That's why it hurt. Seconds later, the screen pinged again. A video call request from Lena. I hit accept. Her face appeared, half-lit, hair up in a claw clip, eyes tired but sharp. "You know this will shake the floor, right?" she said. I'm counting on it. You're taking out a central pillar. That contract has internal dependencies, comm teams, legal, R&D forecasts. I know, I said. We'll reallocate. She sighed. I mean reputationally. Pulling out of a deal this size, with Madison's father, 2 weeks before launch? Olivia, this will have collateral damage. So did they, I replied calmly. Only difference is, they call it family. Lena looked at me for a long second. Then, as if understanding something even I hadn't said aloud, she nodded. You want me to begin drafting the withdrawal? No, I said, shifting the cursor on screen. I already started. Citing conflict of interest was clean, elegant, cold, just like they'd taught me to be. But before I could finalize the wording, another chime sounded. Email. Subject. Thought you should see this. From Claire Simmons, Green Corp Liaison. The message was short. No greeting. Just one sentence. There's something you might want to know before you withdraw. An attachment blinked at the bottom of the screen. PDF. 5 pages. Internal memos. Forwarded from one green executive to another. I clicked. The first memo was from March, a pricing strategy note. As per Ryan Monroe's conversation, we may consider revising bid terms. Nexus Tech has limited recourse legally due to non-exclusive clause. My jaw locked. Second memo. April. RM noted his sister's company would not expect direct competition. Suggest we engage legacy partners quietly. My stomach tightened. Third memo. June. Final confirmation. Madison Green and Ryan Monroe approved price undercutting strategy targeting Nexus Tech's proposal. Expected PR shield. Family ties minimize backlash. I felt like I'd been dunked in ice water. This wasn't negligence. It wasn't indifference. It was orchestration. He used me, used my company, like a rung on a ladder, then pulled it out as soon as he was high enough not to fall. So it wasn't just indifference. It was war. I wasn't invited to the family brunch, so I showed up to the boardroom breakfast. The glass doors of Monroe Holdings opened at exactly 8:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the board convened. Reception hesitated for a beat when they saw me, polished in navy slacks and a charcoal coat, but waved me through. Old habits? I knew the security protocols better than some of their executives. Outside the boardroom, my heels echoed across the polished stone floor like a countdown. On the wall to the left, a framed portrait of William Monroe shaking hands with a former mayor. Just past it, Ryan, grinning with Madison at a gala I'd sponsored, but hadn't been invited to. Inside, the table gleamed under cold LED light. 12 chairs, 8 filled. I recognized the faces. Claire sat near the end, stylus in hand, her expression unreadable. William occupied the center as if he'd been born into it. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed, not in surprise, but in calculation. Olivia, he said coolly, you're not on the docket. I'm not here for docket items, I said, setting my leather folder on the table. I'm here for disclosure. The room stilled. Claire straightened slightly. I slid a stapled packet across the table. Formal notice. Nexus Tech will be withdrawing contractual support from the Green engagement, effective immediately. One of the board members, a man with steel-gray hair and an impatient watch tap, lifted his brow. Excuse me? I met his eyes. Due to undisclosed insider manipulation. William didn't blink. If you're here because of what happened at the wedding. This isn't personal, I said, voice measured. It's protocol. He leaned back, fingers steepled. You're making a lot of noise over a contract that doesn't even require your board's approval. Nexus Tech is a partner, not a parent. Yet it was my firm's technology, my firm's equity, and my firm's reputation bundled into this launch, I said. And your son encouraged Green Corp to undercut us while hiding behind my signature. William's jaw tightened, but his tone remained casual. Emotions don't belong in business, Olivia. You taught me that once. No, I said, retrieving a copy of Claire's email from my folder. You taught me that, when it's convenient, principles are flexible. I slid the documents across the table one after another: internal memos, pricing directives, strategy suggestions, each stamped with dates, each laced with Ryan's fingerprints. Claire's gaze flicked to the papers but remained stone still. Only when William looked at her did she give the faintest shrug, neutral, but not dismissive. This, I said, tapping the final page, is what happens when nepotism assumes it can play chess with someone who built the board. A younger board member leaned toward the man beside him, whispering something that carried just enough volume to be dangerous. If this goes public... William's palm hit the table softly, not in anger, just enough to draw the room back in. We can settle this quietly, he said. No need for posturing or threats. I smiled faintly. I'm not threatening. He squinted. Then what are you doing? I'm illuminating. The word hovered in the air like fog, slow to fade. Silence. Just the hum of the air system and the tick of someone's antique watch. I gathered my folder. Nexus Tech will send the final withdrawal documentation by end of business. I trust the board can handle the internal damage control. William didn't respond. Neither did anyone else. As I turned to leave, Claire's phone lit up. Her eyes flicked to mine for just a moment. Then she lowered her gaze and typed something. By the time the elevator doors closed behind me, my phone buzzed. Claire. There's more. Meet me tonight. Turns out I wasn't the first Monroe woman they erased. Just the loudest. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, surrounded by brittle pine and snow-dusted stone. No gate, no camera, no pretense. Just a faded mailbox with M. Monroe etched in brass, barely legible beneath the rust. I parked beside a pickup that hadn't seen salt or polish in years and stood for a moment in the cold Vermont air, letting the stillness steady me. Inside, the warmth caught me off guard. Wood walls, worn rugs, a fireplace that cracked quietly with cedar logs. A dog-eared stack of legal books lined one wall, and over the mantel hung a photo: William and a woman in her 20s, laughing beside a lake. Margaret opened the door fully. Her hair was silver but thick, tied in a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. She wore a flannel shirt tucked into jeans and looked like she hadn't attended a family function in 2 decades. Olivia, she said, as if tasting the name. Took you long enough. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, I admitted. She stepped back, letting me in. If I didn't, you wouldn't have found me. The interior smelled of wood smoke and lemon balm tea. I followed her into the living room, settling onto a patched armchair opposite her. Coffee? She asked. Please. She returned with 2 mugs and a small smile. So, what finally cracked the glass? I took a breath. Ryan's wedding. They sat me in the kitchen. Her brow arched. Elaine never did understand subtlety. I've been cut out before, I said. But this, it felt orchestrated, like a final purge. Margaret nodded slowly. It always is. There was a pause. Then she stood and walked to a drawer beneath the bookshelf, pulling out a folder. I thought maybe someday you'd show up, she said, so I kept this close. She handed me a copy of William's will, dated 2012. I scanned the first few pages, then stopped. My name, clear as daylight. Olivia Monroe, primary beneficiary. I looked up. Before Elaine got her hooks in deeper, Margaret said. Before the family started measuring worth in obedience. She pulled another paper from the folder. This is the 2021 revision. Conveniently, you disappeared. No official witnesses, No filed verification. Just notarized by a friend of Ryan's from some private firm in New Jersey. My heart beat faster. That's a legal hole. She nodded. A large one, if someone were inclined to use it. I stared at the pages, the dates, the signatures. It wasn't just an emotional exile. They'd rewritten the script, reassigned the legacy, buried me in silence. They never hit me, I said softly. They just ignore me until I hit something back. Margaret sipped her coffee. They did the same to me. I refused an arranged marriage when I was 23, wanted law school instead. William called it defiant. Elaine called it unladylike. And they cut you out? No. She smiled faintly. They buried me. First the invitation stopped, then the photos. Eventually the story changed. I was eccentric, unwell, distant. But I was just inconvenient. I looked around. You seem to have done okay. She shrugged. I built something quieter, not smaller, just mine. My phone buzzed on the side table. Claire. I let it go to voicemail. Margaret leaned forward. You've got tools I didn't. Visibility, leverage, a voice they can't mute with distance. They'll fight dirty. Then don't fight. Reclaim. You don't need revenge, Olivia. You need to reclaim what's yours. I stared at the will again. The ink hadn't faded. My name hadn't disappeared. It had been erased. Deliberately. Strategically. But it was still here. Still proof. Still mine. They thought my silence was surrendered. It was stored. Steel cabinets, matte screens, and a controlled 65 degrees. The Nexus Tech archive room was colder than most boardrooms, yet far more honest. No polished speeches here, no forced smiles. Just data. Rows of it. Labeled, time-stamped, undeniable. Lena stood near the entrance, tablet in hand, eyebrows pinched. Claire entered behind her, holding a slim black envelope like it might bite. I took it without a word and slid it open with the corner of a keycard. Inside was a printed memo, Nexus Tech letterhead, my own company, marked confidential. Claire watched me read. It was filed through the standard partner channel, routed to Green Corp's legal. I scanned the document. Ryan's signature at the bottom. Familiar, but something was wrong. This is dated October 30th, I said. But Ryan was in Singapore that week. I saw the hotel charge alerts myself. Lena pulled up the internal logs. That would mean forged, I said flatly, holding the page up to the light. The stylus signature had the wrong angle, the curve too clean. Not Ryan's usual impatience. It looked manufactured. Claire stepped forward. I wasn't sure, but I thought you should see it before I handed it to compliance. You did the right thing, I said. Now we do better. I placed the memo on the center table and tapped a drawer. It hissed open, revealing a locked USB drive embedded into a foam compartment. I entered my biometric passcode. The drive slid out. Margaret's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Still storing evidence like a litigator, I see. I smiled. I learned from the best. I uploaded the forged memo, cross-referenced it with an archived contract amendment draft from 2020, one that Ryan had approved with wet ink, not stylus. The discrepancies were clear. If we brought this to court, not only could we nullify their attempt to remove Nexus Tech, but we could call into question the integrity of every deal Ryan had pushed through the family trust. Margaret listened silently. Then, that's enough to nullify everything they claimed. If the signature's proven false, the 2021 will and the green contract both collapse. Lena looked up. What's the play? We don't ambush, I said, eyes narrowing on the screen. We orchestrate. Claire placed another file on the desk, an investor profile report. 5 major shareholders of Monroe Holdings, two of whom had been uneasy about Madison's influence for months. One was already on record questioning Ryan's aggressive growth style. Lena grinned. I can get meetings with 3 of them by Wednesday. Make it happen, I said. Send the agenda through legal first. We stay clean. Then I picked up my phone and opened the Nexus Tech media portal. 15 seconds. That's all I needed. I angled the camera and began. Sometimes, the kitchen is where revolutions begin. The people you overlook? They don't vanish. They prepare. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I hit send. Claire's eyes widened. Scheduled for press? No, I said. Scheduled for timing. The clip went to Claire's encrypted account. She'd know when to leak it. After the board meetings, after the tension reached just enough of a boil to make it irresistible. Down the hall, I could hear Nexus Tech's marketing team murmuring behind the glass walls, energy shifting like the hum before a thunderstorm. Lena joined me at the threshold. Are we going to war? I looked at the floor-to-ceiling map of our global server points, a trail of blinking blue across the continents. No, I said. We're taking back the map. I didn't need spies. I had inbox access and memory. It was just past 1 a.m. and the city outside my window had finally fallen quiet. My home office was dim except for the soft blue glow of dual monitors and the half-empty mug of coffee I couldn't bring myself to reheat. I stared at the login screen of a shared family cloud account, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Ryan's password hadn't changed in years, not since that ski trip when he left his laptop open at the lodge bar, and I saw him type it in without knowing I was watching. He always thought he was untouchable, that I wasn't watching, but I always was. Golden Boy 88. Enter. The screen blinked, hesitated, then gave way. The cloud was cluttered with drafts, half-finished pitch decks, vacation itineraries, and digital detritus of someone who never thought his secrets mattered. But I found the folder buried 3 levels deep. Monroe, Green, Deal 2023. Opened it. Draft email, unsent. Madison's father is on board. If Nexus Tech doesn't step aside, we'll just make them irrelevant. Focus on the optics. We'll handle the internal bleed later. Dated September 12th. I scrolled through more. Email threads between Ryan and 2 Green Corp executives. One thread titled, Transition Plan. They weren't just planning to squeeze Nexus Tech out. They were replacing us completely. And doing it months ago, before I'd even been invited to the wedding. Claire responded within minutes of my encrypted forward. Cross-referenced with Green internal board minutes. Meeting logged September 13th. Topic: Supplier transition strategy. It's a match. I messaged Margaret on our secure thread. What are we looking at legally? She called immediately, voice low and clipped. Tortious interference, it's provable. The paper trail establishes intent, not just negligence. That means this could go beyond civil penalties. I opened a spreadsheet, started indexing everything: dates, names, draft subject lines, and most damningly, the shift in tone between early and late September. Ryan had stopped being cautious. He felt safe, confident. Then I found it. A memo titled Family Alignment Strategy, created September 20th, drafted by Madison, sent to Ryan, CC'd, Elaine Monroe. My breath caught. The memo outlined a PR narrative, transitioning Monroe Holdings into a younger, cohesive vision. There was language about reducing external dependencies, about legacy transitions, and one line underlined twice. We must protect the brand from those who refuse to evolve with it, even family. Margaret was still on the line. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Olivia? She asked. I hit mute. My eyes burned, not from fatigue, but something sharper, older. She knew. My mother knew. She was never passive, never clueless. She signed off on my removal, my erasure. She didn't just turn her back. She gave them the blade. I scrolled back through every holiday card, every clipped conversation, every time she said, "Maybe you're not cut out for this family's legacy." And I saw it now for what it was. Not disappointment. Strategy. The cursor blinked at the end of a sentence on my notes document. Elaine Monroe approved the strategy to replace Olivia. I stared at it. "I need a break," I whispered, though no one could hear. But I didn't leave the room. I leaned back in my chair, surrounded by glowing screens and silence. I didn't cry, didn't scream. The betrayal had calcified into something colder. I whispered instead. My mother orchestrated my exile. They finally invited me to brunch. I brought the wrong appetite. The elevator glided open onto the rooftop of the Elsinore Hotel, a midtown gem draped in faux ivy and understated wealth. The November breeze teased the linen tablecloths, carried the faint scent of sea salt and white truffle, and reminded me that the air, like people, could be beautiful and biting at once. They were already seated. Elaine in muted gray, posture like a cathedral column. William beside her, sipping his usual, unsweetened iced tea with lemon. Ryan and Madison flanked them, their matching sunglasses almost comical. They looked up, startled as I approached. "Olivia," Elaine said, a note of practiced warmth slipping through cool lips. "You got our message?" "No," I replied, pulling out the chair at the end of the table. "I got the reservation alert. The system syncs with my name." They hesitated. Ryan gave a sheepish grin. "We thought it'd be nice to catch up. No pressure, just family." I let my eyes roam across the table. Flaky pastries, imported jam, champagne sweating in its bucket. "Lovely setting," I murmured. "So, did Green finalize the new supplier yet?" The sentence landed like a dropped glass. Madison blinked too quickly. Ryan inhaled sharply, choking on his champagne. Elaine's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she reached for her napkin. What are you talking about?" Madison asked, feigning curiosity. I slipped my phone from my coat pocket, tapped twice, and slid it across the table. A photo filled the screen. The memo from Madison, CC'd to Elaine, the subject line bolded in black. Family alignment strategy. The silence stretched. Ryan leaned forward, voice low and tense. "Where did you—" "The cloud," I said, sipping water. "It has no loyalty, only bandwidth." William shifted in his seat, glancing at Elaine, then back at me. He said nothing. Typical. Elaine finally broke the silence. "You wouldn't ruin your brother's wedding legacy over this." I tilted my head. "You already did." She blinked, stunned by the simplicity. The tablecloth fluttered as Madison stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile. "I need air." She didn't wait for permission or excuse, just stormed toward the edge of the terrace, phone already in hand. Ryan stared after her, his jaw clenching once, twice, before he looked down at his plate. The smoked salmon on rye lay untouched, curling at the edges. Elaine's voice dropped. "We're still your blood." I didn't flinch. "And yet," I said, voice steady, "I bled alone." She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not the daughter with degrees, patents, and a company, but a woman who had learned, finally, not to beg for belonging. The breeze picked up again, rattling the silverware ever so slightly. Behind us, the skyline shimmered, oblivious. No one spoke for a long time. Madison didn't return to the table. William signaled for the check. Ryan refused to meet my eyes. I stood, tucking my chair back in. "Thank you for brunch," I said. "It's good to know I still have an appetite for the truth." And with that, I walked away, leaving the memo, the tension, and the Monroe mask of civility flapping like a torn napkin in the wind. On Thanksgiving, they expected turkey. I served paperwork. The Monroe estate in Connecticut was its usual monument to delusion: oak-paneled halls, imported marble, centerpieces so tall no one could see across the table. But this year, the mahogany dining room was missing one familiar shadow: me. Instead, I stood barefoot in my apartment kitchen in Manhattan, apron smeared with garlic butter, helping Lena drizzle glaze over the roast duck. Margaret and Claire sipped spiced wine from mismatched mugs, their laughter light but sharp with a shared undercurrent. Satisfaction. Friendsgiving, we called it. But there was something holier about this circle, this trio who had seen behind the curtain, who knew what it cost to be erased and still return with the pen. At exactly 3 p.m., 2 envelopes were hand-delivered by a sharply dressed courier in navy gloves. One arrived at Green Corp headquarters. It contained the formal withdrawal of the Nexus Tech contract, accompanied by a legal notice of intent to sue for damages exceeding $30 million. Breach of trust. Intentional tortious interference. Enclosed were scanned memos, email headers, and a neatly tabbed digital drive. The second envelope was addressed to the Monroe Board of Directors, but delivered straight to the family estate. Inside, a legal challenge to the 2021 will revision that had cut me out, backed by witness affidavits and Margaret's original certified copy of the 2012 will, which named me sole successor to the Monroe holdings, including the family estate and controlling shares in our investment wing. Thanksgiving stuffing had never tasted so dry, I imagined. William called me 10 minutes later. I was in the middle of a toast. Lena had just raised her glass to quiet victories. My phone buzzed once. I glanced at the screen, let it ring twice, then answered. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad," I said, lifting my glass again. His voice was low, grating. "What the hell is this?" "I assume you're referring to the certified filings, not the cranberry relish, though Margaret swears hers is better than court documents." "You don't do this to your family. You're confusing protection with deference." I stopped doing the latter. The line was silent for a moment. Then Elaine's voice took over. "I want a meeting. Tonight." "I'm unavailable," I said calmly. "Pie's in the oven." "You think this is amusing?" I walked out to the terrace, the crisp air slapping my cheeks awake. "I think it's overdue." Elaine's voice lost its veneer. "You think you're invincible now? You want the media to start digging into your rebel years? That little investor scandal at MIT? The sabbatical in Prague?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because fear didn't have fangs anymore. "Try. I own the narrative now. You'll bring this family down." I took a breath, watching the sunset burn orange behind the high-rises. "I didn't set the fire," I said. "I just stopped hiding the smoke." There was a pause. Then William's voice returned, quieter this time. "You're willing to burn it all?" I looked across my apartment, at the warmth, the laughter, the aroma of cinnamon and quiet power. "No," I said. "I'm just clearing the rot." The first blow landed. I forgot they still had claws. By the morning of November 25th, the digital air was poisoned. My name was everywhere, in all the wrong ways. Nexus Tech CEO under fire for forged signature scandal. Insider sources reveal history of manipulation by Monroe heiress. Can you trust a billion-dollar empire built in the shadows? The headlines multiplied like bacteria, feeding on rumor and carefully curated doubt. A smear campaign executed with surgical precision. And I knew exactly whose fingerprints were on the scalpel. Madison had always been more subtle than Ryan, more image-obsessed than Elaine. Of course she'd plant it through her old PR firm, the one she used to run influencer deals for before marrying into our dynasty. Her cruelty wasn't loud, it was elegant. By noon, Lena was pacing. "We're being called for comment by CNN, Forbes, even a lifestyle podcast called Power and Poison. They all want a quote or denial, or both." Let them wait, I said, eyes glued to the analytics dashboard. Our stock was down 4.1%. Institutional investors had begun to shift in subtle tremors. No sell-offs yet, but the tectonic unease was growing. That's when the photos surfaced. Grainy shots from 2009, me in a velvet dress, dancing barefoot on a rooftop in Prague, laughing, a bottle of something reckless in hand. There were hundreds of photos from that year. They chose 3, each one designed to feel like a dagger against my credibility. The captions? Unforgiving. A history of irresponsibility? From fringe to fortune, Olivia Monroe's shaky path to power. Lena brought the tablet over. Even Reddit's tearing you apart. They're calling you vodka CEO. Claire's email came in 5 minutes later. They're moving fast. Green is courting a Chinese supplier aggressively. I'd wager the deal closes in 72 hours if we don't redirect. I leaned back in my chair, breathing through the fury curling in my chest. This wasn't just deflection, it was a counter-offensive. Do we have enough proof? Lena asked quietly, almost afraid to break the air. I turned to her. Truth isn't about proof, it's about persistence. She looked away, unsure. For the first time, even Lena's shoulders sagged under the weight of this war. But I wasn't done. Schedule the investor meeting, I said, voice steely. You sure we shouldn't respond to the press? They want outrage. I want outcome. The war room went still. I stared at the articles still open across my screen, each lie trying to masquerade as truth. They could own the front pages, the hashtags, the whispered conversations for a day or two. Let them dance in the illusion of victory. Because I wasn't playing for applause. I was preparing for permanence. Let them win the news cycle, I whispered, cold rising in my spine like armor. I'm winning the meeting. I never wanted an army, just one person who didn't flinch. But somehow I'd found 3. The loft smelled like dust, takeout grease, and purpose. A thin strip of evening light sliced through the broken blinds, pooling across a cluttered table filled with legal pads, USB drives, and cold pizza. In a corner, the heating unit clunked and hissed, sounding like it, too, was bracing for war. Margaret sat upright at the table, legal documents spread before her like maps before a battlefield. She didn't need reading glasses. Her mind was sharper than any font. She circled phrases, rewrote sections, made notes in a legal shorthand I hadn't seen since law school visits in my 20s. Intentional tortious interference, breach of fiduciary duty, dereliction of governance protocols. She underlined each charge, her voice steady. And we'll file this contingent on tomorrow's vote. Claire stood by the window, holding up her phone, looping the audio she had captured the week prior. Ryan's voice, unmistakable, smug and slurring. Our investors are sheep. They'd follow anything if you brand it as disruption. He laughed in the recording, dry and dismissive. And that, Claire said, stopping the audio, is what a board fears more than bad PR, being made fools of. Lena clicked open the investor summary and pinched the bridge of her nose. If this goes to the press after the meeting, we'll need 3 rounds of internal rebuttal messaging and a lockstep timeline for press releases. I leaned over the table and pulled the lights closer, illuminating the center. Here's what we do, I said. First, we hit the board with the evidence chain: email, audio, document trail. Claire, you walk them through the contract inconsistencies. Margaret will field legal questions, and I'll lay out motive and timeline. And if they ask why now? Lena said. I looked her dead in the eyes. Because they finally taught me how to play their game. The silence that followed was thick with something sacred. Alignment. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were orchestrating. Lena let out a slow breath. They wanted a scapegoat. You're becoming a mirror. I nodded once. Good. Let them see themselves burn. Claire tapped the screen again. What if this backfires? She asked, not out of fear, but necessity. I straightened. Then I burn alone. But the truth stays lit. Margaret closed the final folder and slid it into her leather briefcase. She didn't smile. Margaret never smiled when the stakes were high. She only looked at me with eyes that had seen battles before. Tomorrow's the meeting, she said softly. After that, you're either CEO again, or disowned for good. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I had already chosen. Let the empire decide what to do with its inconvenient daughter. I'd already decided what to do with the truth. They told me I didn't belong at the table, so I brought my own chair, with receipts. William Monroe's voice had the same measured contempt it always did, echoing through the cold conference room of Monroe Tower. The oval table stretched like a courtroom bench, polished to perfection and flanked by leather chairs far too expensive for the morals seated in them. I stood alone on one end, laptop tucked under my arm, heels clicking like gavel strikes on the tiled floor. "Thank you for joining us, Olivia," William said. Not a trace of warmth, not even the formality of Ms. Monroe. "We were hoping you could clarify the confusion surrounding the green contract. Purely procedural." Elaine adjusted her pearl necklace but didn't look up. Ryan lounged in his seat, fingers tapping nervously on his water glass. Claire sat silently in the row behind, eyes scanning everyone, unreadable. Margaret was beside her, hands folded, the picture of restrained fury. I didn't sit. I didn't need to. "I appreciate the invitation," I began. "I came prepared to clarify. Not just the green situation, but the entire pattern of interference leading to it." William's smirk twitched. "Olivia, this is a board meeting, not a therapy session." I smiled back, cold. "Then I suggest the board take notes." I opened the laptop and mirrored the screen to the central monitor. Slide 1. Nexus Tech Green Timeline. Initial meetings. Development sprints. Legal approvals. Every milestone supported with digital timestamps and documents. No gaps. No guesses. The partnership was stable until May 2023, I explained. Then, anonymous pricing suggestions appeared, undercutting Nexus Tech by 12%. This is when Green began delaying signature. I clicked to slide 2. Email headers appeared. Internal communications between Ryan and Madison's father. Each subject line a little knife. Green alternatives, Nexus not viable, replace, OEM. Their dates perfectly lined up with Green's hesitation. Whispers fluttered around the table. I waited until they died down. Each email was recovered legally, I added. From a shared cloud folder Ryan forgot to clear. You'll see metadata preserved. Ryan sat forward. "This is a breach of privacy." Claire stood from the back and stepped forward. She handed a slim black folder to the nearest board member, who passed it like a ticking bomb until it landed in front of William. A yellow sticky note on the front read, "Verified." Elaine finally looked up. "Olivia, families disagree, but airing dirty laundry with this level of flair is called transparency," I cut in. "Besides, this isn't about family. This is corporate sabotage." Slide 3. A grainy video filled the screen. Ryan at a rooftop party, drink in hand, arm flung around someone I didn't recognize. His voice, unmistakable. "She'll never fight back. She's too wrapped up in her feminist crusade to notice we're already replacing her. Let her file her memos. She's a nameplate in the basement." The silence that followed was jagged. A young director, maybe mid-30s, someone I hadn't seen in earlier meetings, spoke up. "If this is fabricated, sue her. If it's real..." He looked at William. "We owe her shares, an apology, and a restructuring of this board." Ryan looked to Elaine, who looked to William. No one blinked. William leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "What do you really want, Olivia?" I looked at each of them, then to the nameplate on the far wall where the Monroe Group's founding members were engraved in brass. It used to include me, before the 2021 revision quietly wiped it. My name back on the plaque. Truth doesn't scream. It waits for the silence after denial. The Monroe boardroom, already tense from the morning's reckoning, had barely settled when Claire's phone lit up. She didn't ask permission. She just connected the video feed to the screen without warning. "What is this?" William barked. Claire didn't respond. The screen flickered, then displayed a grainy video, clearly captured from a live stream, the kind people regret, but never delete. Ryan's face filled the frame, unshaven, sweaty, with a drink sloshing in one hand. His tie was loosened, his words slurry but deliberate. "She's not family," he said, laughing into the void. "She's a walking checkbook with a superiority complex. That's all Olivia ever was. I mean, come on. You really think Mom and Dad wanted her in the family photos?" The room froze. No one moved. No one breathed. "Played the long game, didn't she?" he added. "Invested in my company, played the savior, only to weaponize it later. Typical martyr crap." Elaine stood, walked across the room, and slapped Ryan. Hard. The sound echoed more than the words had. The room exploded in murmurs. A board member to the left, older and balding, quietly typed on a tablet. Moments later, a ping hit the main conference screen. A public email sent to all Monroe directors. Subject: Formal request. Full re-audit of family assets and Nexus Tech disclosures. William's lips parted as if to speak but couldn't form words. Claire, composed as ever, looked directly at the board. The 2021 will, which removed Ms. Monroe from legal standing, is based on faulty witness signatures and coercive influence. As of this morning, it is... She glanced at Margaret, who stood and joined her at the front, legally dead. Margaret added calmly, "The 2012 version is the only enforceable document. Olivia Monroe is not just an heir, she's the primary one." Elaine collapsed into her seat like air had been stolen from her lungs. She didn't cry, but the glaze in her eyes betrayed that something fundamental had cracked. I stood still, grounded in that rare air when the mask not only slips, it disintegrates. "You taught me silence was dignity," I said to Elaine. "But dignity doesn't mean disappearing. Now you know how erasure feels." The others didn't speak. Even William avoided my eyes. Elaine, voice hoarse, reached into her designer handbag. Slowly, deliberately, she drew out an old cream-colored envelope, edges soft from time and fingertips. No logo, no seal, just a name written in heavy ink, Olivia. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held it out. "He wrote you this," she said, barely above a whisper, "the day before he died." The silence returned, but not empty. It was full now, with history, regret, and the undeniable weight of a truth too long buried. Winning doesn't feel like victory. It feels like an empty room echoing your name. It had been a week since the board meeting, but the echoes hadn't stopped. They came not from outside, but from within. My apartment was quiet, too quiet. No press at the door, no angry phone calls, no threats from Monroe lawyers. Just silence, the kind that fills a space when the shouting ends, and there's no one left to argue with. The media called me a business titan with bite. They praised my resilience, hailed me as the symbol of modern corporate justice. But they didn't see the girl curled up on her couch, staring at a cream-colored envelope that had taken 10 years too long to arrive. The headlines were clear. William Monroe resigns in wake of will scandal. Ryan Monroe disappears after leaked footage. Elaine Monroe resigns, publishes poignant open letter. I hadn't read it. I didn't need to. I knew her words would be polished, guilt-dipped in elegance. I didn't want polished anymore. I hadn't spoken to anyone except Lena, and even then, only in short instructions. Email Claire, cancel that call. Postpone the investor Q&A. She hadn't pushed. Neither had Ethan. He came over 2 nights ago, brought nothing, said nothing. He just sat beside me on the floor, leaned his shoulder into mine, and stayed until I finally fell asleep. No lectures, no questions, just warmth. That was love, I thought. Not grand gestures, just presence. Now, alone again, I finally broke the seal of the envelope. The paper inside was thick, aged but preserved. My father's handwriting, precise, masculine, and emotionless, just like him. Olivia, you are always the sharpest. Sharp things scare people. I stayed silent not because I didn't see you, but because I did. I loved you the hardest way I knew. I stayed silent so you'd grow teeth. Your mother wanted you gentle. I knew the world wouldn't be. I hoped one day you'd understand. William. My hands trembled. My throat closed. A bitter laugh escaped me before I crumbled into sobs. I needed a voice. I whispered, not fangs. The silence swallowed the words whole. I didn't know how long I sat there. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Time had no texture anymore. The front door opened gently. Lena stepped in, holding a tablet. She took one look at my face. Red, wet, torn open, and said nothing at first. Then she crouched, handed me the tablet. They offered you chairwoman. I stared at the screen, unblinking. Lena tilted her head. You want it? My hands closed around the letter again. Teeth, voice, victory, grief. Did I? I thought revenge would fix me. Turns out justice is quieter than I imagined. The room was nothing like a boardroom. No marble tables, no looming portraits of power, no sterile glass walls. Just a rectangle painted in soft white, a window cracked open to let in the November breeze, and a circle of chairs. On one, I sat. Around me, a dozen faces, young, nervous, hungry. Some wore confidence like armor, others wore fatigue like history. Claire leaned quietly against the back wall, arms crossed but relaxed. Lena sat beside her, fiddling with the name tags she'd printed, trying to look busy. But I saw it, the way her smile came too quickly whenever she looked at me. Relief, maybe. Or pride she didn't know how to express. I cleared my throat. This isn't a seminar, I said. You're not here to learn how to be me. They stared. No one moved. I'm here because someone once gave me capital with strings attached. Then someone else gave me a corner seat with no microphone. Then someone, me, decided I was tired of waiting. A girl in the front, maybe 20, lifted her chin. I remembered her file. First in her class. Rejected from 3 incubators because of a high school record that listed low family income as a red flag. I saw myself in her. Not in the resume, but in the quiet defiance. I wasn't always a CEO, I said. Once, they sat me in the kitchen, not even near the buffet table, just next to the recycling bin. I smiled, swallowed it. Then I built my own table. Claire pressed her lips together and turned her face away. I knew that look. One tear she didn't want anyone to see. Lena didn't bother hiding hers. She just nodded, like she'd been waiting years for this room. I stood, moved to the whiteboard and uncapped a marker. This program isn't about pitch decks or press releases. It's about infrastructure. You will get legal help, financial mentorship, emotional clarity. You will not be rescued. You will be equipped. They scribbled. They whispered. They looked, for the first time, like they believed me. And if any of you are ever told you're too young, too loud, too poor, remember, that's their forecast, not your fate. A hand went up. The same girl. Did you ever want to quit? The room fell still. I looked down at the floor, then at my palms. Still shaking, even now. I still do, I said honestly, more often than you'd think. But I hate disappearing more. Silence. Then quiet applause, not for effect, but like a breath released. The session wound down. Papers shuffled. Plans began forming like roots breaking concrete. They left one by one, some shaking my hand, others too shy to speak. As the last girl stepped out, a man entered. Mid-30s, inconspicuous suit. He said nothing at first, just handed me a small black USB drive. "What is this?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Just this. There's something you should see. About Green Corporation. Some stories don't end. They echo." The smell was the same: rosemary, roast chicken, lemon zest. But everything else had changed. The kitchen was no longer dim and crowded with servers darting past in silence. Tonight, its warm lighting spilled over polished countertops. The long island in the center was covered with simple handmade dishes, not catered trays. Laughter drifted from the corners, real, unrehearsed. And I wasn't seated by the recycling bin. I was hosting. It felt poetic, almost ridiculous. A year ago, they tucked me here like an afterthought. Tonight, the kitchen was the heart. Not punishment, power. I watched as mentees gathered, some still nervous, others bold. Ethan helped set plates, sleeves rolled to his forearms, humming something off-key. Lena passed around glasses of wine. Claire stood by the door, greeting each guest like a sentinel of grace. We didn't plan speeches, just a quiet thank you dinner. No titles, no reporters, no board, just the ones who stayed when things cracked. A few faces from Nexus Tech. Margaret, too, though she kept mostly in the background. Her presence a steady pulse. Halfway through the evening, a man in catering uniform approached me. Tall, broad-shouldered, older now, but the memory clicked like a match. "You were here last year," I said. He nodded, surprised. "You remember?" "I never forget kitchens," I said with a small smile. He hesitated, then asked, "Weren't you— that night, I mean, weren't you in the corner seat?" I raised my glass slightly. "Yes. And now I own the building." His face split into a grin that felt like redemption. "Damn right, ma'am." Dinner rolled on. Conversations bloomed. Laughter cracked like glass. And I sat back, letting it wash over me. I hadn't won everything. Some things couldn't be won, only reclaimed. When the noise quieted, I stood and raised my glass. "To every woman they thought was too soft," I said. "Too quiet, too safe." The room stilled. To every daughter told to wait her turn. Every sister edited out of the photo. Every voice mistaken for an echo. I looked at them. At Ethan, at Claire, at the mentees still blooming. "They forgot something," I said, smiling. "The kitchen never forgets." A murmur of agreement, a warmth that no boardroom applause could match. As I sat, Claire approached. Her eyes flicked left, then down. She slid a small USB into my palm. No words, just a subtle nod. I turned it over in my fingers. The weight wasn't physical, it was future. Part 2? Maybe. But for now, I let it rest on the table, right beside my wine glass, right beside the memory. The boardroom fell silent, but the echoes of her defiance rang louder than any applause. Years of being overlooked, erased, and underestimated had crystallized into a single truth. Justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be heard. Perhaps standing up today means never bowing to silence again. If this story moved you, like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you're still waiting for your own justice.